Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland, and here I am in Feltham, one of London's less salubrious suburbs, in front of the Freddy Mercury Memorial. And yes, it is a tree. I saw it on the map and I vainly assumed it was going to be a statue, but no, it's not a likeness of him. As you can tell, this tree has not been growing so many years. So this memorial is up in Feltham to Freddie Mercury since he resided here. He resided about a mile that away over the bridge, which is currently under repair, Gladstone Avenue. There's a blue plaque on his house, which I might go to sometime. So Freddie Mercury, he's born in Zanzibar. That's an island off the east coast of Africa. Zanzibar was then a separate colony from Tanganyika. They're both British colonies at the time, but obviously Zanzibar and Tanganyika subsequently merged to form the country of Tanzania. So Freddie was born into a Parsi family. So there were Indians who believed in the Zoroastrian religion. Core Parsis, as in their ancestors had left Persia centuries before, resided in India for many generations. His father was a civil servant in the British colonial administration, shifted to Zanzibar, and that's where he grew up. He had one sister, Freddie, and he grew up speaking absolutely flawless English. He went to boarding school in India, formed a band called the Hectics, and that's when he realised himself to be homosexual and self-understanding, but to have to be very much in the closet. It was very much disapproved of in just about every country in those days. So Tanzania became independent. Some of the Indian minority felt things were going to be bad for them. Anyway, so he was born a British citizen, perhaps surprisingly, considering I think not a single member of his family had ever set foot in the British Isles. But anyway, they had the right to come and reside in the UK, so they did. So they moved to Feltham. Freddie Mercury wasn't a very academic sort. He went to an art school in Ealing, which is a few miles east of here. It's now the University of West London. It did some graphic design qualification. And I know someone who knew him reasonably well at the time and said that he was a very diffident and retiring sort, really the last sort of person you'd think would be a rock star. Anyway, there was quite a lot of pushback against immigration at the time, even though more people were emigrating from the UK than immigrating to the UK. So there was a racist backlash against people like him. The National Front was marching around saying that all these non-white immigrants ought to be booted out. Enoch Pohl had given his Rivers of Blood speech. So it was a rather frightening time to be an ethnic minority person. Now, Freddie Mercury, his real name was Farrokh Bulsara. They were very pale-skinned Indians. They weren't immediately identifiable as an ethnic minority, but he chose to de-emphasize his Indian and Zoroastrian background. So he briefly worked in Heathrow Airport, which is only about 3 miles away from here, as a baggage handler. He met Brian May, and he met some of the other guys from Queen who grew up around here as well. They were also students, and then they formed their band Queen. It's a word that everybody knew. It had positive connotations, but obviously the monarch, but it was an allusion to his same-sex attraction. And in the early 70s, they started performing in pubs and clubs, and really it went from there. A star was born. So it was born the 5th of September 1946. But it's only in the mid-70s he began to become very well known and a multi-millionaire. Spent a lot of time in Germany. He purchased a house just off Cromwell Road on Logan Place, previously owned by the Hoare banking family. Hoare as in Hoare, but he liked to call it the Hoare House. Garden Lodge is the proper name of the house. When he passed away, he left it to a female friend of his who lives there to this day. It's not open to the public, but it's a bit of a shrine for Freddie Mercury fans. So Freddie Mercury and his band, they had so many hits with Bohemian Rhapsody and so on. Well, I suppose Fat Bottom Girls Make the Rocking World Go Round. We Will Rock You, which came out in the mid-80s. The Great Pretender. And then is in the late 80s he was diagnosed HIV positive, and antiretrovirals didn't exist back then, so unfortunately his health began to decline very rapidly. And by about 1990 he was a shadow of his former self. He was looking drawn and pallid, and was almost like a walking cadaver. And he made his last public appearance several months before he died, and he was clearly very infirm. So that was him. So he kept a closely guarded secret what was happening. Unfortunately, rumours leaked out, tongues wagged, and he was confronted at the airport about it. But anyway, when he was really on his deathbed in December 1991, he released a statement asking him to join with him and his doctors to fight against HIV/AIDS, and confirming that that was the disease that was killing him. and he sadly died at the relatively young age of 45, having been in terrible health for the last 3 years or so of his life. So he was taken to Kensal Green Cemetery, where he was cremated. It was going to be a Zoroastrian funeral, and obviously they don't believe in cremation. There was a Zoroastrian priest there, but we don't have these towers of silence in the United Kingdom. They only exist in Mumbai for that purpose, because Zoroastrians believe you mustn't bury a body. They're the four elements: wind, water, earth, and fire. If you bury the body, that dishonors the soil. If you burn it, it desecrates fire, and they're often called fire temples. They look on these sacred flames, which they believe simply represents God, isn't actually God. You mustn't put body into water, because that would defile the H2O. And then what's the other option? Somehow, well, putting it in a tower of silence to be consumed by a vulture, that doesn't dishonor the air. I don't know what the reasoning is, but that was that. So he was burnt, and then his ashes were given to his female friend, and they are hidden in a location only known to her. She's never disclosed where they are. So that is Freddie Mercury. What a magnificent rock star who had these supernumerary teeth, which gave him that unique voice. And he entered rock immortality with that summer of 1985 concert at Wembley Stadium here in London, giving a really splendid rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody and a number of other songs. So that is really the superlative rock performance of all time. I just wish I could have been there to witness Freddie Mercury doing that one on the stage with bopping with his the microphone. Anything about Freddie Mercury? Well, that splendid biopic came out of him a few months ago, so highly recommended if you can watch it. So that's it. He grew up in this place, which is really not that special. Well, he came here as a teenager, and you wouldn't have imagined that someone who was going to set the world ablaze would grow up in somewhere which is fairly forgettable, like Feltham. Sorry, Feltham. It's not horrid, but I think you'll agree that it's not astonishing either. That's enough about Freddie Mercury, who lived in Feltham.